My name is Camille Whitaker, and for 34 years, I was the quiet shadow trailing behind my family's perfect portrait. At Governor Malone's annual gala, I sat alone at a corner table in a modest black dress, blending in with the shadows, watching my golden boy brother Damon work the room like he was born to do it. Nobody noticed me until the governor himself paused mid-conversation, squinting as if recognizing something he shouldn't have missed. "Wait, you're Senator Whitaker?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Across the room, Damon's face went pale. In that moment, everything changed. But to understand the weight of that instant, you have to know where I came from. Growing up in Boston as a Whitaker meant you were someone. Our last name hung over lecture halls and charity galas like chandeliers. My parents, Lawrence and Veronica Whitaker, weren't just wealthy, they were legacy wealthy. Old money, country club money, the kind of money that comes with expectations carved in granite. Excel academically, get into Yale or Princeton, pursue law or finance, marry well, and for heaven's sake, don't embarrass the family. My brother Damon never had to be told twice. He was the prototype, charming, athletic, effortlessly brilliant in the way that made guests at dinner parties say things like he's going places. I, on the other hand, was the question mark. Not rebellious, just curious. Where Damon fit into the mold with grace and ease, I kept asking why the mold existed in the first place. While he polished his debate speeches in prep school blazers, I buried myself in books about government systems and civic reform, driven by a sense that something was broken in the world and someone had to fix it. That someone, I naively thought, could be me. The rift between me and my parents widened during sophomore year when I gave a school presentation on an environmental policy that threatened the profits of several companies connected to our family's investment firm. The report was data-rich, fair, and critically praised by my teacher. At a charity function the following week, another parent mentioned it to my father. He was livid. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" he asked me that night, pacing in the walnut-paneled study like I'd vandalized the family crest. The Thompsons were there, Camille. Their foundation is funding our water initiative. Now they think we're raising some kind of left-wing crusader. I tried to explain. I told him the research was sound, the evidence overwhelming. Shouldn't truth matter? My mother didn't even meet my eyes. "There's truth," she said, "and then there's what's appropriate. You need to learn the difference." From that moment, every time I strayed from their unspoken script, it was treated as a betrayal. When I joined the Young Democrats instead of the varsity tennis team, it was a disappointment. When I wrote for the school paper instead of applying for summer internships at Whitaker and Pierce Investments, it was a crisis. By senior year, Damon had secured an early decision slot at Yale. There were champagne toast, embossed stationery, and multiple celebratory brunches. I applied to the University of Massachusetts and didn't even get a congratulations. My father called it a missed opportunity. My mother referred to it as a phase. But the truth was, I had finally chosen something for myself. I wanted to study political science. I wanted to understand not just how government worked, but how it failed. When I announced my college decision over dinner, my father's fork clinked sharply against his plate. "This isn't just about you," he said. "This is about generations who built the Whitaker name." I looked him in the eye, feeling both terrified and free. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing a different path." "A path to what?" my mother asked, dabbing at the corner of her mouth like my words had left a stain. Government work, marches and slogans, you're better than that, but I wasn't trying to be better. I was trying to be honest. Damon went to Yale and became the story they told proudly. I went to UMass and became the story they avoided. But at school, I thrived. I found my people scrappy, brilliant organizers who cared more about impact than prestige. I enrolled in courses taught by ex-policy advisors who challenged my every opinion. Professor Delaney, my constitutional law professor, told me one afternoon after class, "You have an instinct for this work, Camille. You just need to believe your voice matters." That single sentence changed the trajectory of my life. No one in my family had ever said that to me. I volunteered on local campaigns, registered voters in forgotten neighborhoods, and for the first time, felt powerful not because of my name, but in spite of it. Each holiday I returned home became more unbearable than the last. My brother spoke in corporate acronyms and golf metaphors. My parents asked polite questions that felt like traps. When I told them I'd been offered a summer role on a Senate campaign, my father asked if it paid. My mother asked if it was safe. "Camille is still finding herself," my father told my aunt one Thanksgiving, "hopefully before it's too late," but I had already found something they never had: purpose. It didn't come with a corner office or a six-figure salary, but it came with fire. My fire. The breaking point came during my senior year, over Christmas dinner, when I announced I'd accepted a full-time role with a nonprofit dedicated to civic education. "That's enough," my father said, as if he'd just read my obituary. "We've indulged this long enough. If you're choosing this life, you'll do it without our support." The next morning, my bank account was disconnected from the family ledger. My health insurance policy was terminated. My mother left me a note suggesting I reconsider before it was too late. I packed my bags with shaken hands but a solid heart. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into something. My first apartment had rats and radiators that clanked like chains. My clothes came from thrift stores. My groceries from clearance bins. Damon posted photos of luxury apartments and champagne deals. My parents forwarded his updates like gospel. But when I saw a woman tear up because she finally understood how to register to vote because of a workshop I helped organize, I knew I had chosen right. I worked 12-hour days for $30,000 a year. I had no car, no retirement plan, and no time for self-doubt. But I felt alive. Every community meeting I facilitated, every young person I convinced their voice mattered at all, built something invisible but unshakable. And then, one fall night, I met Levi Professor Delaney's son, a speechwriter for a progressive congressman. He asked me more about my ideas than my past. He listened. He stayed. With Levi's encouragement and a coalition of neighbors, colleagues, and believers, I filed to run for city council. My family didn't attend the campaign launch. They told friends I was working on a community blog. But on election night, as the results came in, and I realized I'd won by 178 votes, I didn't think of them. I thought of that quiet kid who stood up in AP English to present a report no one wanted to hear. She had done this. She had found her voice. And it was only the beginning. My term on the city council began without celebration. There was no congratulatory call from my parents, no email from Damon, no mention at all from the family whose name once opened every door in this city. But the residents of District 7 knew my name now. not because of what it once meant, but because of what I had done. I approached public service with the same stubborn precision I brought to every volunteer campaign and voter drive. I listened, I learned, I showed up. At first, some of the old guard on the council underestimated me. They thought I was idealistic, inexperienced, too young to navigate the politics of potholes and zoning boards. But I had spent years working in the margins. I knew the difference between what people said in meetings and what they did behind closed doors. I asked hard questions. I read every page of every budget proposal. I earned the nickname Councilwoman Homework behind my back. I took it as a compliment. Within 6 months, I'd passed a transparency ordinance that required city contracts to be published online. Within a year, I'd pushed through a pilot program for affordable housing that prioritized single mothers and formerly incarcerated citizens. Local journalists started calling. One profile in the Boston Beacon called me the quiet storm in city politics. That article got passed around statehouse circles more than I realized at the time. Damon noticed. I know because a colleague of his reached out to me discreetly, congratulating me and adding, "Your brother was just talking about your housing initiative yesterday." I didn't know what to make of that. Damon had never once acknowledged my win. But if he was discussing my work, maybe things were shifting, if only slightly. What I didn't know was that while I was gaining ground in municipal government, Damon had aligned himself with James Malone, the rising star of our state's political scene and now its governor. Damon was his chief of staff, polished and powerful, the ultimate insider. The Whitakers beamed with pride. My parents began referring to him as the future lieutenant governor at cocktail parties. Meanwhile, I was still being described as pursuing community work, like I ran a yoga studio and not a legislative office. I buried myself in policy and kept my expectations low. Then, something I never anticipated happened. A state Senate seat opened up in our district following the early retirement of a longtime incumbent due to health issues. I wasn't even the first person to hear about it. I found out when Professor Delaney forwarded me an email with the subject line, "Your shot?" Inside was a note from a progressive political strategist named Monique Lee, who had seen my city council record and wanted to talk. I wasn't sure I had the stomach for another campaign, especially one at the state level. The pressure, the funding, the media, it was a different beast. But Monique was persuasive, and Levi, now my partner in every sense, didn't hesitate. "You're already doing the work. Now do it with a bigger platform." The decision weighed on me for weeks. I knew what running meant. I knew what it would dredge up. My family had tolerated my city council win because it was small, manageable, and could be ignored. But a state senate campaign? That would be public, loud, unavoidable. I called my parents out of courtesy. My mother picked up. The line was quiet when I told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was clipped. "Camille, this has gone far enough. This experiment." "It's not an experiment," I said calmly. "It's a campaign for a real seat in a real Senate, and I'm the front runner." "You're 33 years old," she said, her voice rising. "Still renting, still unmarried, still living in a way that we don't understand. What happens when this campaign fails? Will you finally come to your senses?" "I'm not looking for approval anymore," I told her. "I just thought you should hear it from me, not the news." There was no answer, only a click. A week later, I got a text from Damon. "Saw the announcement. Good luck." No punctuation, no offer of help, but I read it 3 times anyway. Running for state senate without party money or family money was like entering a boxing match without gloves. I leaned on my network of organizers, nonprofits, and community leaders. We ran a tight, disciplined campaign built on field work and policy substance. We didn't have the slick ads or the deep pockets, but we had people. Lots of them. One Saturday in May, I stood in a church basement with volunteers packing voter info packets when Monique burst in with a printout. "This is it," she said breathlessly. "You just pulled ahead in the polls. You're leading." The room exploded. I stood, stunned, thinking not of the numbers, but of the nights I ate ramen in my studio apartment while my parents dined on Crystal, the days I registered voters in the snow while Damon held court at the governor's mansion. The contrast didn't feel bitter anymore. It felt earned. My team grew. Momentum grew. Donations came in, but so did the attacks. Opponents questioned my experience, my viability, my background. And then the whisper campaign began. Why doesn't her own family support her? If she's so effective, where are the Whitakers? The press never said it directly, but the implication lingered. Maybe she's a fluke. Maybe they know something we don't. Monique warned me. Levi prepared me. But it still stung, because even though I had let go of needing their love, I hadn't let go of wanting their respect. The night before the first major debate, I stayed up pacing, unable to sleep. Levi found me in the kitchen, barefoot, gripping a mug of tea that had long gone cold. "You don't need them to define you," he said quietly. "You never did." "I know," I whispered, but it would have been nice to be seen. The debate changed everything. I didn't just hold my ground. I took it. With data, with fire, with composure that came from every year I'd spent building from nothing. The moderator asked why I had chosen public service. I answered simply, because I believe people deserve a government that sees them, listens to them, and works for them. Not just the powerful, not just the wealthy. Everyone. That clip went viral. Not Kardashian viral, but enough that my inbox filled with messages from young women, from working moms, from first-generation students who said they finally saw someone like them in politics. Damon never said a word. My parents didn't reach out. But my grandmother sent me a card. In her careful cursive, she had written, "I always knew you'd be someone. That was enough." Election night came fast and loud. Volunteers crowded into our tiny campaign HQ, clutching pizza and each other. When the final numbers dropped and the local anchor called it for me, the room burst into tears, into song, into something sacred. I stood in the center of it all, stunned, humbled, exhausted. I had done it. We had done it. I was now Senator-elect Camille Whitaker. The next morning, the Boston Herald headline read, "Whitaker wins, grassroots candidate defies legacy politics." Underneath, a subheader noted, "Political outsider beats establishment favorite in stunning upset." I clipped the article, not to send to my parents, but to keep for myself. Proof. Not that I belonged, but that I never needed permission in the first place. And still, despite everything, part of me hoped. Hoped for a call, a letter, a sign. It never came. And maybe that was the final gift they gave me. The freedom of no longer needing their validation. Only my own. I received the invitation on a Tuesday morning in October. Heavy cream cardstock embossed with gold foil, it arrived with no note, just an official line. Governor James Malone requests the honor of your presence at the annual state gala benefiting the Children's Education Initiative. Levi found it first on the hallway table. Do you think it's a real invite or a mass list add-on? He asked, holding the envelope up to the light like it might contain a hidden message. I stared at it for a long moment. If Damon is the chief of staff, he approved this list. Either he meant for me to be invited, or someone slipped me in. You going? Levi asked gently. I hesitated. It would be the first time in over a decade that I'd be in the same room with my brother and possibly my parents in a public political setting. A part of me still ached at the memory of being treated like the disappointing sibling, the one too idealistic, too fringe, too stubborn to fall in line. But another part of me, older, stronger, forged through years of advocacy and quiet victories, wanted them to see me now. Not as the daughter who embarrassed them, but as the senator they never believed in. I'm going, I said, finally. Not for them, for me. On the night of the gala, I chose a simple black dress with clean lines and a pearl pin my grandmother had given me after my city council win. Levi looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo, his hand steady in mine as we approached the grand hotel where the event was held. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and self-importance. The tables were arranged in concentric circles around a gilded stage, each place set in boasted name cards written in careful calligraphy. Our names were tucked near the edge of the room, a polite nod to protocol but far from the governor's circle. I expected it. I welcomed it. From a distance I spotted Damon gliding between tables, all sharp angles and practiced charm, his hand resting briefly on backs, his smile tight and professional. I watched him for a moment, marveling at how flawlessly he had become our father's dream right down to the pocket square. He hadn't seen me, yet. Levi squeezed my hand under the table. Remember who you are, he whispered. You've earned this space. I smiled at him, grateful. As dinner began, I exchanged pleasantries with a university president to my right and a nonprofit executive to my left. No one mentioned Damon, but I caught the glances, the flickers of recognition. That's the Whitaker girl. Isn't she the one who... They didn't finish their sentences. They didn't have to. I excused myself midway through the second course to find the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. On my way back, I passed a table where a trio of women sipped champagne and whispered in perfectly modulated tones. She's here, one of them said. Camille, the one who never quite... Her parents must be mortified, another replied, especially with Damon doing so well. Their voices faded as I walked by. I didn't flinch. I didn't stop, but my spine burned with fury. I returned to my seat just as Governor Malone rose to the stage. He spoke eloquently about the importance of education and opportunity, his words rehearsed but sincere. I half listened, swirling my water glass, eyes fixed on nothing. And then, after a round of polite applause, he announced he would be moving through the ballroom to thank key supporters. I hadn't expected that. Moments later, a quiet rustle swept across our section as the governor himself approached our table. Flanked by aides, smiling like a man whose handshake counted as currency, he paused, scanning faces, and then his eyes landed on mine. He blinked, surprised. "Wait, you're Senator Whitaker?" he asked, the question just loud enough to silence those around us. I rose, extending my hand with a practiced smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person, Governor. Thank you for the invitation." He shook my hand warmly, the recognition dawning fully in his eyes. "You're the one behind the education funding reform bill," he said. "We've been following your work. It's excellent." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Damon freeze. His eyes snapped toward us, and for a split second, the mask slipped. Shock, panic, something dangerously close to shame. "I didn't realize you two were connected," the governor continued, glancing between us. "Whitaker's not exactly a common name." Damon stepped forward then, voice even but hollow. "Senator Whitaker is my sister, Governor." A silence fell like snowfall, measured, chilling. The governor turned slowly. "Your sister?" he echoed. "I had no idea." He looked back at me, clearly reassessing everything. "You never mentioned her." "Family and politics are complicated," Damon murmured. "Indeed they are," I said lightly, sparing him the dignity of a deflection. "But I believe we all serve in the way we're called to." The governor smiled, awkwardly pivoting. "Well then, we'll certainly be reaching out about that health care initiative. Impressive work, Senator." He moved on. Damon and I were left facing each other, years of silence compressed into a single moment. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said quietly. "That seems unlikely," I replied. "Your name's on the event committee." He winced, then recovered. "Look, this isn't the place, but we should talk. Really talk." I tilted my head. "Now that I'm inconvenient to ignore?" "It's not that," he insisted. "It's just things have been complicated. They didn't have to be." My voice was calm, but each word landed like stone. "You had years to say something, to correct the narrative. You chose silence." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Camille," he said, softer now, "we'll talk. Just not here." "No," I said, stepping past him. "Not here, because I have people to speak with, people who value what I've built." I left him standing in the aisle, caught between the brother I once adored and the man who had watched me be erased without protest. Back at my table, I smiled, composed, as the governor's wife waved me over to her circle. The energy had shifted. Eyes that had ignored me now tracked me. The underdog had entered the ballroom as an afterthought. Now they knew my name. The rest of the evening unfolded like a page turning. I was approached by donors, nonprofit heads, even a university chancellor. I kept my head high, my tone gracious, my presence steady. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Recognition wasn't my goal. Purpose was. But for the first time, recognition had found me on my terms. As we left the gala, Levi opened the car door and looked at me like he'd never been more proud. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was myself," I replied, and for once, that was enough. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the glowing facade of the hotel, the place where the lie of who I wasn't had finally cracked under the truth of who I'd become. 3 days after the gala, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in over a decade. My father's private line. I stared at it for a full minute before answering. "Camille," he said, skipping any greeting. "Your mother and I think it would be appropriate to have dinner, to clear the air." Appropriate. Not necessary, not overdue, just appropriate. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "Not until we talk about what's happened. Really talk. Not smooth it over like bad PR." There was a pause. "The past is the past," he replied stiffly. "Looking backward serves no productive purpose." I could almost see him straightening his tie, rehearsing that line like it was a shareholder statement. "I disagree," I said. "You've spent years pretending I failed when I didn't. You told people I was lost, aimless, radical. But I've built a career. I've made real change. You didn't just misunderstand me. You misrepresented me." Another long silence. "Perhaps we viewed things through different lenses," he finally said. "It's not about lenses," I answered, my voice quiet but immovable. "It's about respect. And for years, I didn't have yours." He exhaled. "We'd like to move forward." I let those words sit before responding. "Then it starts with honesty. And Levi comes with me to dinner. He's part of my life. He's my family now." My father agreed, albeit coolly. The reservation came 2 weeks later, discreet restaurant, private room, no reporters, no spectacle. Just the four of us. My mother looked impeccable as ever, pearls resting above a beige silk blouse, but her smile was tightly stitched, cautious. My father greeted Levi with a nod that bordered on cordial. We made small talk about committee assignments, apartment renovations, transportation infrastructure. It was oddly civil, but the air buzzed with everything unsaid. Midway through dessert, my mother reached for her wine glass and said, "We may not have always understood your choices, Camille, but we never stopped caring." I set down my fork. "Caring isn't the same as respecting. You didn't just misunderstand me, you made me feel small, like I was embarrassing the family. You spread that narrative to friends, colleagues, reporters. That wasn't care. That was contempt." My father shifted. "Maybe we were hasty in our judgments." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. Not, "we were wrong," but "we were hasty." Just enough deniability to sleep well. "Going forward," I said, meeting both their eyes, "if you want it to be in my life, it has to be honest. You don't have to agree with every choice, but you do have to respect that I made them. I won't shrink myself to fit the family story again, and I won't pretend it didn't hurt when you erased me." No one replied, but they nodded, slowly, tentatively. We left the restaurant with an agreement, not a reconciliation, but a fragile bridge made of terms clearly laid out. That night, in the quiet of our apartment, Levi pulled me close. "You were brilliant," he said. "Not angry, not bitter, just clear." "I used to think I had to yell to be heard," I murmured. "Now I know that being clear is louder." A week later, Damon messaged me. "Coffee?" That's all it said. We met near the State House at a corner cafe he used to love back when we were teenagers sneaking in after AP exams. He looked less polished than at the gala, softer around the edges, more human. "I owe you an apology," he said as soon as we sat down. "Not just for the gala, for everything." I sipped my coffee. "Why didn't you speak up all those years? You knew I was doing real work. Why let them think I was flailing?" He looked down at his hands. "Because it was easier. As long as you were the failure, I didn't have to question anything. I gotta be the success story, the golden one. Challenging, that meant challenging how I got there, and whether I even wanted to be there." "And do you?" I asked. The silence that followed said more than words. "I've been thinking about running," he said finally. "Not for optics, not for Dad, but because I want to do it differently. And because seeing you, seeing what you've done, made me believe maybe I could do it right too." I didn't forgive him instantly, but something shifted. A door cracked open, not to the past, but maybe to a future where we could be siblings again. Months passed. I continued my work in the Senate, pushed bills forward, sat through endless committee hearings, helped pass legislation expanding access to mental health services for low-income families. The press began calling me the quiet architect, someone who built meaningful reform without the ego or the noise. One afternoon, I met with a group of high school girls visiting D.C. They were wide-eyed, nervously clutching notepads and programs. One of them, her voice barely above a whisper, asked, "Did your family believe in you when you first ran?" I paused, looked at her. "Not really," I admitted. "But that didn't stop me, because the most important belief you'll ever earn is your own." She beamed. It felt like full circle. Levi and I began talking seriously about having children. I told him, "I don't want our kid to think they have to be perfect to be loved, or powerful to be worthy. I want them to be whole." "And seen," he added, "fully." We agreed. That would be our legacy, not a name on buildings, but a life that allowed for honesty, for doubt, for growth. On my 40th birthday, my parents hosted a small dinner. It was awkward, imperfect, but there was effort. My father raised his glass and said, "To Camille, who had the courage to define success on her own terms, you've made a difference in ways we never imagined." It wasn't complete redemption, but it was something. Enough. Later that night, as I stood on the balcony with Levi, watching the city lights blink like fireflies across the skyline, I exhaled. "I used to think being underestimated was my curse," I said. "Now I think it was my gift." "You made it your strength," he said. "That's even better." I nodded. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about politics or family, it was a story about becoming. About choosing authenticity over approval. About writing your own definition of worth even when the world hands you a script you never asked for. I didn't burn the blueprint. I just built a better one, my own.